Hello, everyone. How are you? You found us. I hope you're comfortable. If you're here to talk about money, you're in the right place. Good? All right, so a little warning before we get started. We're actually recording this session today. It'll be available on the Admission and Financial Aid Office's websites for people who aren't able to attend this weekend. So what we're going to do is Kelly and I are going to do some presenting first. We have a handful of slides. I'll introduce her in a second. And then we'll leave time for questions and answers. And I'm going to ask you to use the microphones that are in the aisles today to ask your questions so that we can catch all of those on the recording. Sound good? Okay. So with that, hello, good afternoon. My name is Karen Cooper. I'm the Director of Financial Aid here at Stanford. And I'm here with my colleague, Kelly Takahashi from the Bursar's office, Stanford's billing office. And we are going to be talking about how this whole process of financial aid and paying the bills and how all of that works together, if that sounds good. So, do I have any Stanford alums in the room? So those are the people to ask questions of, right? Any parents of other Stanford students? Anybody's been through this process already? At least one. Great. So welcome, everybody. So happy to have you here. What we are going to do this afternoon is talk about Stanford's financial aid program a little bit, financing options for those of you who are thinking about how am I going to handle this, and what happens in future years with the financial aid program. And then I will turn it over to Kelly to talk about billing and paying and all of the other good financial information. So with that, I will go ahead and get started. So the Financial Aid Office, we are located over on, we're in Montag Hall on Galvez, near the Alumni Center where you checked in, right? We're right across the street. And actually this weekend, we've got all hands on deck in the Financial Aid Office. So if you'd like to talk to somebody about your individual situation, you are more than welcome to stop by the Financial Aid Office. Even tomorrow morning, we will be open. If we can't serve you the minute you walk in the door, we will sign you up for a time to talk to somebody about your specific situation. So please do come talk to us if you have individual questions. We're also available by phone, etc., throughout the summer. We know that May 1 is a really important deadline for all of you, so we're doing our best to get all of the questions, answers, and issues taken care of before May 1. In the Financial Aid Office, we do financial aid counseling and awarding. We also manage all of the outside scholarships that students bring to Stanford. So even if you're not receiving need-based aid from us, if your son or daughter has an outside scholarship, we can help you manage that. And we manage the Federal Work Study Program in the Financial Aid Office. So, where are you in the financial aid process? Hopefully, at this point, these things, the profile, the FAFSA, IDOC, our institution documentation service that we use to collect your tax return information, those are all familiar to you because you've already been through this process. If you listen to me today and you decide, oh, I really should have applied for financial aid, you can still do that. That's okay. A late application does not affect the amount of aid that we're able to offer. What it does affect is our ability to get that to you by May 1. So if you decide today you need to apply for financial aid, you're going to have to make that admission decision without benefit of the financial aid information. But hopefully you are here because you've received that financial aid award letter from us. And the important thing to note about that is we mailed that first one home in the admission packet because we know that it's so easy for mom and dad to get a hold of it that way, right? And that's the last time we're going to mail a piece of paper for an award letter. So from now on, those award letters are available to your student electronically through our student system called Access. So they will be able to log in and download a PDF of their award letters and share that information with you. And yes, it's called Access. You can ask the Stanford alums in the room about the ACTS, right? It's a long story. So from now on, when there's a new change in award notification or in subsequent years, the student gets an email that says, go look in Access and you'll find your new award letter. So hopefully you're here because you're making decisions about how to handle that net cost. And let's talk about that. So first of all, how did we put together your financial aid package? And this formula is really the heart of a need-based financial aid program. This is what we are looking at when we're making decisions about how much scholarship funds to award. So cost of attendance, and I'll talk about what all is included in that cost of attendance, less the parent contribution that we calculate, and I will talk more about what that calculation entails, and the student responsibility that we expect of the student. We do expect students to take responsibility for a portion of their educational costs. The difference between all of those is how much we award in scholarship and grant aid. So that piece of the decision, how much scholarship to award, is actually the easiest piece of this process. And this is why a conversation about, I feel like I need more scholarship in order to be able to afford for my son or daughter to attend Stanford, we morph that into a conversation about, why is this parent contribution too high for your family? What's going on with your family? What can we do to adjust that parent contribution so the scholarship is at a more reasonable level for you? Does that make sense? So that formula is very important to us on the financial aid side. But I think the formula that you should be paying attention to at this point is this one. The scholarships and grants less the cost of attendance. The difference between those, the scholarships and grants are the money that doesn't have to be paid back. That's the good money that we all want, right? The difference between those is what we call your net cost. This is the cost that's going to come out of your pocket one way or another. There might be some student loans, there might be some work-study eligibility to help meet that net cost, but really it is the family's responsibility in one way or another. And it just so happens that we organize our award letter that way to help you understand this. So the cost of attendance and the scholarships and grants are listed at the top. We calculate that net cost for you. And that information at the bottom of the page, the parent contribution, the student responsibility, the loan eligibility, are suggestions for managing that net cost. But it's really up to you to figure out how you're going to do that. So let's talk about each of those components. The cost of attendance first. So this is a really important concept because it determines a ceiling for how much aid that we can offer. This cost of attendance, it includes, and I'm going to draw a little line here, it includes both the things that Kelly is going to bill you for, the tuition, fees, room and board. Those are standard costs that everybody's going to see. Those new student fees are specific to first-year students. They're charged in the fall quarter, so fall quarter might be a little more expensive than subsequent quarters. Those are the things that you see on the bill. The personal expenses, the books, even transportation back and forth from home, we recognize that you are going to have those costs in order to be a fully functioning member of the Stanford community, right? And so financial aid is considering those expenses, but it's not something we're going to bill you for directly. But we know it doesn't make sense to cover your tuition, but you can't buy books, right? So all of that needs to be included in the cost of attendance. These amounts, especially for the personal expense allowance and the books and supplies, is based on survey of current students. So we ask current students in the spring quarter, after they've had a couple quarters of experience, what do you typically spend on your personal entertainment? Going to athletic events, they are allowed to go to the movies every once in a while, those kinds of activities. So even if you're not receiving need-based aid from us, I think it's helpful to know these numbers. If your child is telling you, I need $1,000 a month to live at Stanford, that's not true, right? So this is what the typical student needs to be at Stanford and really to participate in all of our activities. One more thing I want to point out, the student fees allowance. It's not an exact cost because students' exact costs may differ a little bit. Stanford actually does a good job of getting a lot of charges on the bill. And we really wanted to be able to draw this line between what's on the bill and what's not on the bill. So we've created this category this year. It includes things like the campus health service fee that everybody has to pay. That gives them basic access to the Vaden Health Center, which is different than insurance, and we can talk about that difference in a little bit. Things like there's a P.O. box fee, there's a technology fee, there is a student activities fee, house dues depending on where they live. Some courses carry material fees. This allowance is meant to reflect all of those expenses on the student's account. Okay, so we're trying to look comprehensively at the full cost for a year. Next come the scholarships and grants. In this example, there's only support from Stanford available, but if there were federal or other resources, you would see that additional information as well. And then the net cost is what is going to need to be paid toward the total cost of attendance, not necessarily toward the bill, right? So this is really the key part of that calculation of eligibility, the expected parent contribution. Now, you know, because you filled out the profile in the FAFSA and all of our forms, that we have collected a lot of information about your family situation. We are looking at your income, your assets, the size of the family, the number of family members in college. We look at where you live. All of that information goes into a formula that we use to calculate an expected parent contribution. We use a formula because we want to be equitable to all of our families. We believe that families with similar incomes should be expected to pay the same amount. Families that have just a little bit more income should be expected to pay just a little bit more, not a lot more, right? So we base our analysis on a calculation. At the same time, we know that, you know, a family that earns $125,000, has 2 kids in college and lives in the Bay Area is very different than a family that earns $125,000, only has 1 kid in college, and say, I can pick on Ohio because I have family from Ohio, right? So those are very different families. We all understand that intuitively. And our analysis helps us to make those differences. Now, Stanford has always had a really great financial aid program. The benefits of our endowment and our generous donors over the years have allowed us to do that. We realized several years ago that what we used to say when I first came to Stanford was, we have a really great financial aid program, just apply, we'll tell you how much you qualify for after you get admitted, it's great. And then we sat back and wondered why students from low-income backgrounds were afraid to apply to schools like ours, right? So we realized that what we need to do is help people understand just how generous our financial aid program is. What we've done the last several years is said to all of our prospective students, look, if your family income is less than $65,000 a year, and you have assets that are typical for someone in that financial situation, that's our caveat, right? I am going to pay attention to somebody who is just in a temporary low-income situation and has lots of assets. But we're really trying to reach out to the families that come from low-income backgrounds and say, look, if your income is less than $65,000 a year, we're not going to expect parents to pay for educational costs. And we do that because we want people to understand, even that, seventh grader who is making choices about what classes they're going to take down the road, that is going to set them up to be eligible to apply to a school like ours. It's really important to have that clear message. And we decided while we were at it that it is important for families even higher up the income ladder to understand Stanford's affordability. So we said, additionally, if your income is less than $125,000, we're going to make sure you have enough scholarship funds to cover tuition, right? You've all heard that in the media. So the way that works functionally, if you think back to our formula, that means that the parent contribution can't be more than about $17,200 for this year. So that family that I referenced in Ohio that makes $125,000, has only got one kid in college, their parent contribution is most likely going to be $17,200. That family in the Bay Area, so again, we're still doing our formula. We're looking at the full financial situation. They've got 2 kids in college. They may see something less than $17,000, right? But everybody in that 125 or less are going to get enough scholarship to cover tuition. Families at higher income levels absolutely still need our help to come to Stanford. You all know it costs a lot of money to come here. So if you just think of those 2 pieces of information as data points, at $65,000, 0 parent contribution; at 125, $17,200. The line of parent contributions just slopes up from there, continues to go up. At higher income levels, life is more complicated. There are a lot more factors involved, so it's harder to make a simple statement that is going to cover everyone. But please do rest assured that we continue to give out scholarship funds as we go up the income scale. We do have a calculator on our website to help families understand the potential eligibility. And even for you as parents of potentially current Stanford students, it's a great tool to use for what-if analysis, right? What's going to happen in a couple of years when I have 2 kids in college? Or what's going to happen if my job changes, right? So that calculator is helpful for that. One important point about the parent contribution is that it is a contribution towards that total cost of attendance. So there is never a point when we say, okay, it's time to write the check for the parent contribution, send that in, right? So it is divided in thirds, usually across the year, that you're going to be making that contribution towards educational costs. What I recommend everybody do, probably in August when the first bill comes out, is sit down as a family with that award letter, talk about, okay, which pieces of the cost of attendance is the parent contribution covering? Which pieces is the student responsibility going to cover, right? For most families, if the scholarships and grants get applied to the student account first. So that's what's going to pay tuition and fees and room and board, depending on the amount of the scholarship. If the amount of the scholarship is also meant to help cover some of those expenses that were below the red line, personal expenses and travel, the student would see that as a refund after the expenses are applied to the student account. But for most families, if the parents pick up the difference of what the scholarship doesn't cover on the bill, and the student covers those expenses that happen outside of the bill, if they use their earnings to pay for their personal expenses, get their books, that is usually how people are satisfying that financial aid expectation. So that's the parent contribution. Student responsibility. We've talked about this quite a bit already. Our standard expectation, and it's been at this level for several years, I don't anticipate any big changes, is a minimum of $5,000 towards educational costs, which sounds like a lot of money until I explain to you that we pay $15.30 an hour as a minimum for students on campus. So they can earn that $2,800 that we expect by working 6 to 8 hours a week. And I know, too, that many of you are sitting there thinking, oh, but they've worked so hard to get there. I don't want to expect them to work while they're here, right? I see some nodding. I want to let you know that there's been research done that shows that students actually do better academically if they are working that little bit, 6 to 8 hours a week. Don't expect them to work 20, 30 hours a week. But 6 to 8 hours a week, if you stop and think about it, it makes a lot of sense. You know, now, this year in high school, their day is very structured, right? The bell rings and tells them where to go. And they're busy till 9 o'clock at night. You know, you've been driving them around for years. But when they get to college, their day is a little more flexible, right? We don't see a lot of students before noon. Life is a little different. So now it's up to them to structure their time. Having a job with someone like me who understands the academic schedule, understands when they've got midterms and finals, really helps plug them into resources on campus and gives them that little bit of structure to their day that helps them keep things in perspective. So it's well worth it. And Stanford is a campus where even if students don't have an expectation that they need to work in their financial aid package, they are able to find jobs on campus. Not this weekend, wait until September when they're here, but many students work on campus and are able to do so pretty comfortably. There are two types of job eligibility. There is federal work study that is based on need as identified on the FAFSA. So it's federal money. Departments like to hire federal work study students because it doesn't cost us anything, right? The feds are paying for those students. But you'll see also many students have this category of academic year job earnings. And that means we expect them to go out and find a job that's not federally funded. And students are able to do that on Stanford's campus. One more point about student responsibility. These numbers sound very specific. Again, much like the parent contribution, we never ask them to sit down and write out a check for the student responsibility now. It's really up to them to decide how they want to handle this. And if they want to earn more over the summer, work less during the academic year, if they want to take an unpaid internship over the summer and maybe take out a student loan to finance that part of their student responsibility, or work more during the academic year, that is totally up to the students. We are not policing that for them. As a matter of fact, one way students can handle their student responsibility is by bringing outside scholarships. So I'm talking about the private scholarships, the Rotary Club scholarships, the PTA scholarships, all of that good stuff that they're finding out about usually now, their senior year of high school, right? So students can use those outside scholarships to replace their student responsibility dollar for dollar. So the first $5,000 of any outside scholarships that they bring in would replace that student responsibility. First, their academic year earnings. Second, their student contribution. Students who are receiving need-based scholarships from us, if they receive more than the amount of their student responsibility in outside scholarships, then that does replace or reduce Stanford's commitment to meet their need because they have a resource that is meeting their need. So we will reduce institutional scholarship funds when those outside scholarships are more than the student responsibility. Another way to say this that is very direct is that outside scholarships cannot be used to replace a parent contribution when there is need-based aid in that financial aid package. Students can still work. Remember I said you don't need to have financial aid eligibility to work on campus. Students can often still take out student loans. So there are ways they can help you with that parent contribution, but those outside scholarships can't do that. So we asked students to start reporting their outside scholarships to us in mid-May. Those are processed by the financial aid office. For most agencies already do this. They know to send the check directly to the school. If they make that check payable to Stanford, that's the easiest way to handle it. We just apply it to the student's account. If the scholarship is more than $500, we'll automatically divide it in thirds for them and apply it across autumn, winter, and spring quarters. Okay, so we do a lot of work with funding agencies over the summer to get all of those scholarships in place for students. And just one more way to see how this happens and drive this point home. So this award letter that we've been looking at, now the student receives a $2,000 outside scholarship. It gets added into the grants and scholarships. It reduces the net cost. That's something that doesn't have to be paid back. And it also reduces the student's academic year job earnings expectation. All right. So, other ways that students can help with an expected parent contribution. I know some of you are here because you're curious about financing options, ways that you might handle the expected parent contribution. Students do have a student loan program from the federal government available to help them with their educational costs. You'll notice I haven't really talked about student loans up till now because Stanford doesn't expect students to borrow to meet their need, right? We're offering scholarships to meet their need. But loans can be added upon request. If you applied for aid and we went through our analysis and said, there's no need-based scholarship eligibility for this family, you may have seen an award letter that had a $5,500 student loan in it, right? We're telling you about the loans that are available to you. I know there's a lot of anxiety about student loans out there. Many of our students are very concerned about taking out student loans. The good news is because of Stanford's financial aid program, last year students who graduated, only 19% of them actually had debt. Another way to say that is 81% graduated without any student debt, which is pretty amazing. And those who did borrow did so responsibly. The median indebtedness was about $14,300 for those students who borrowed. Our students have, after 3 years after they've left school, have a less than 1% default rate across all of our student populations. So they're managing that debt very responsibly. I hate to see students so anxious about student loans that they make choices to do things like work 20 hours a week or not take this fabulous unpaid internship opportunity. Because they're afraid of taking out a $2,000 student loan. Taking out a reasonable amount of student loans is actually an excellent way to handle some of those expenses. It allows them to build credit, which they aren't going to find any other loans that they can get just based on their signature and the fact that they're a student at 18 years old. Right? So the student loan programs are not necessarily a bad deal for everybody. So the main loan program that's available to our undergraduates is the Federal Direct Student Loan, which is available to U.S. citizens and permanent residents. So it's based on that FAFSA that you filled out. There are two versions of this loan. There's a subsidized loan and an unsubsidized loan. The subsidized loan means that interest is not accruing during the time the student is still enrolled in school. Interest doesn't start accruing until 6 months after they leave school. The unsubsidized version is available to anyone regardless of need, but that interest is accruing during the time that they're enrolled. The subsidized loan is only available if you still have unmet need in the federal equation. So since most of our students, we are meeting their need with scholarship funds, most of our students are not eligible for the subsidized version of the federal student loan, right? It is a fixed rate loan. The rate is set once a year. So the rate when they take out their loan is the rate that will stay with that loan for the life of their loan. I don't yet know what next year's rates are going to be. They're set on July 1st. But the current interest rate is just over 5%. There is a 1% origination fee that is taken off the top of what they borrow. I think the only drawback of this federal student loan program is the annual limits. which isn't really a drawback. As first-year students, they can borrow $5,500. That's the maximum. Second year, $6,500. And then as they're juniors and seniors, they can borrow $7,500 a year. We've all seen those stories in the media about people who are drowning under student loan debt, the student loan crisis, and how bad things are with student loans. The people who are in those stories did not exclusively use the federal student loan programs. Right? You can't get into that kind of trouble with the federal student loan programs. This is all you can borrow, and there are income payment protections built in. So when they are in repayment, if their income is too low to afford the standard 10-year repayment period, they can be put on a longer income-based repayment period with monthly payments that they can afford. If they have made those minimum payments for 20 years and they still don't have that loan paid off, the remainder is forgiven. If they work in public service for 10 years, make the minimum payment during that period of time, and the loan is still not paid off, the remainder is forgiven. So there's a lot of flexibility with the federal student loan programs that help students keep from getting into trouble with those federal programs. The key is to stay in touch with the lender. And we do spend many hours talking with students who are borrowing before they leave Stanford about what their responsibilities are. Now, if we're thinking about borrowing and you're worried that that student loan level is not enough to allow you to cover the expenses you need to cover, good news. There is a federal parent loan program that would allow you to borrow up to the full cost of attendance that is not covered by other forms of aid, right? So the federal parent loan program is available to U.S. citizens and permanent residents. It's like the student loan program in that there is a fixed interest rate that's set on July 1 every year. It is higher interest rate. This year is 7.6%, and it has a 4% origination fee. There are some years when I stand up here and say, you should use this federal loan program. You shouldn't think about the private loan market. This is not one of those years. So for those reasons, the amount of the interest rate and the amount of the origination fees, for some families, it makes more sense to look at the private student loan market. And by this, I mean directly through banks and credit unions. They probably have already realized that you have a high school senior and have been sending mailers home with information about borrowing options. We do have some information on our website if you're considering doing some borrowing that would help you evaluate the differences between programs. What you gain when you're using some of those private loan programs, they're based on your credit rating. So if you have good credit, you can find better interest rates than what the federal loan program is, right? And we also see a lot of our families using home equity lines of credit, right? There are lots of options out there for you to get money. It doesn't have to be an educational loan. What you lose by not using the federal loan programs are the repayment protections, right? A private lender is going to want you to repay. This private lending can be done in the student's name, but they need a cosigner. So you may feel good about putting that debt in the student's name, but you're going to have to co-sign that loan, which means it hits your credit as well. And if they don't pay, you are on the hook to pay. So please do, if you're interested in exploring some of these options, take a look on our website, look at that information. Over the summer is plenty of time to make choices about how you're going to manage that financing, those financing options. All right, with that, now your big question is, what happens for the next 3 years, right? I can make it through this year. I've got my award letter. I understand what's going on, but what's going to happen the year after that? So we are a need-based financial aid program. So you can think of the annual reapplication process as a check-in about your financial situation. We do ask you to file the FAFSA and the profile again. We're not quite as neurotic about collecting tax returns from everybody from our continuing students. We generally will accept just your W-2s from you to update. And there are later deadlines for continuing students. They're actually getting their applications finalized this week. So you can tell what we're doing. We deal with the freshmen first, and then we turn to looking at our continuing students starting next month. And really, it's just that. It's that check-in with you to see if your financial situation has changed. If your situation is basically the same, you can expect the same sort of financial aid package from year to year. As a matter of fact, our costs typically go up every year, right? So families receiving financial aid are really protected from those cost increases. If your parent contribution stays the same, the student responsibility stays the same, and the cost of attendance goes up, it's the scholarship that's going to flex to handle that, right? I mention the kinds of things that could impact a change to that expected parent contribution, because I think it's important for you to be aware. We really strive for the expected parent contribution to be similar from year to year, so you don't have big changes. But if there are changes in your family circumstance, if somebody's got a new job and is making lots more money than they used to make, or somebody loses a job and there is less money in the household, or if there is a sibling in college one year, but next year there's only going to be one sibling in college, that's an important impact on our financial aid calculation. So let me talk about siblings in college for a second. So when there is more than one family member in college, what we do is calculate that expected parent contribution and really divide it among the siblings in college. It's not exactly a 50-50 split, but it's pretty close. So when there is only one child in college, what's going to happen to that parent contribution? It's going to go up pretty significantly in most cases. So if you're in that situation, you should be aware of that, both directions, right? If you've only got one now and you're going to have two in college in another year or two, you can look for a little bit of relief during that time when you've got two in college. At least you will not have to be paying Stanford quite as much. But be aware that that is a potential change. And if you have questions about those sort of what-if scenarios that you'd like to talk through with the financial aid office this weekend, you're more than welcome to do that. I like to say that this annual check-in with you, that's when we'll find out, if you won the lotto. We'll find out about it then. There's no need to run in and tell us about those kinds of changes in your circumstances. If, however, during the academic year, somebody, heaven forbid, loses a job, or there is a health situation that is affecting you financially, those kinds of issues that are making it difficult for you to pay the bills, that's what we're here for. So do come and talk to the financial aid office during the year if that situation impacts you. We are not the kind of school where, we let you appeal once and we're done. So we want to hear about your financial struggles if you're having difficulty. So I told you the financial aid office was going to get to know you very well. So with that, I'm going to let Kelly come up and talk about the billing and paying process, and then I'll be back to help answer questions at the end. Thank you all.
Thanks, Karen. You guys have been sitting in your chairs for a very long time, so I just want to take a break for a second and say congratulations to all of you for either being a student that's been admitted to Stanford or the parent of a student that's been admitted to Stanford. So give yourselves a round of applause and stand up and stretch if you want to. Woohoo! And those of you at home, congratulations. Not everybody stood up. Okay. It's a very exciting time. So as Karen said, I'm Kelly Takahashi. I'm the Associate Bursar here at Stanford, and I want to just give you a high-level bird's eye view of what the billing will look like once you have accepted admission to Stanford. So once you've accepted your admission, around July, your student account will be created, and we will start collecting charges from around the university to include on the university bill. In August, we will send out the first university bill. We send the bill on around the 20th of each month. So the first one for autumn term will come on August 20th. That bill, I'll show you an example in a couple of minutes, that bill will include the aid that Karen was talking about as a line of anticipated aid. Then in mid-September, that bill will be due. In order to calculate what payment you should make, you can take the total due minus that anticipated aid to figure out how much to send to the university. And as Karen said before, some of the students' educational expenses will be on the bill, but some expenses will not. So let me show you an example. This is what our bill looks like. You'll see that there is the payment due date at the top as well as the total due. In the middle, there's a summary of the charges. On the bottom, there's details. We won't go into that today, but this middle section will show you the anticipated aid. This is a sample bill for 1 quarter. So it shows 1 quarter's worth of charges and 1 quarter's worth of anticipated aid. If the total due minus anticipated aid leaves a balance, that's what you need to send to the university. If the anticipated aid exceeds what the total due is, the student, as Karen mentioned, will receive a refund. And that refund is expected to be used to pay for the other expenses that are not on the bill, like travel expenses and books, etc. So that was 1 quarter. This chart, which is on our website, shows you when we bill throughout the year. So we bill for tuition and fees, what we call the big bill, at the beginning or prior to each quarter. So August 20th and November 20th and February 20th and May 20th. In between, we do send monthly bills, and those would include changes. I'll show you some examples in a minute. Changes or new charges that come on the bill in between. But the really big ones are those quarterly bills prior to the start of each term. And the payment due dates are always the 15th of the month following that bill. So the reason we send a monthly bill is because other charges may come on the bill after the tuition and fees have been charged. Maybe your student has decided to change the course they're enrolled in, and it has the new course they're enrolled in has a course fee associated with it. That might show up. Or maybe your student has cable TV in their dorm room. That would show up. The Stanford card plan, which we'll talk about in more detail, allows students to make purchases on campus with their ID card, and those charges would show up on the bill. So please do have your student, or you if you are a student, look at your bill on a monthly basis. It's an important thing to pay attention to. So the Stanford card plan is something that we created several years ago specifically to help students meet their needs for buying things for educational reasons. Maybe they need to buy a computer, maybe they need to buy books before their aid is provided to them. So the Stanford card plan was meant as a bridge between aid and the bill. So on a previous slide, I think I forgot to mention that the anticipated aid shows up in August, and then the money is actually dispersed to the account just prior to the term starting. So if your student, like I said, needs to buy a computer or books prior to the time that their aid is dispersed, they could use the Stanford card plan to buy those things at the Stanford bookstore. And then just for convenience purposes, we allow students to use their Stanford card plan to do other things on campus, like print or buy a sandwich at the Subway that's nearby. So those things would go directly on the bill, and you would see it that following month. On average, students use about $400 of this. Our limit is $1,000 per term. So in our opinion, students are generally using it wisely. They're not going crazy and buying extra things necessarily, but it is something to talk with your student about and how to manage the Stanford Card Plan. Here's one important thing I wanted to remind everybody of. You will see a health insurance charge called Cardinal Care on your bill. That amount is on the bill because all students are required to have health insurance. However, many undergraduate students are supported by health insurance through their families or some other way and don't really need the Cardinal Care health insurance. The Cardinal Care is an annual program, so if you don't need that health insurance, you must waive by September 15th. The charge for the health care is $5,592 next year, which is a sizable amount of money. So it's an important date to be aware of. If you don't waive by September 15th, that amount will continue to be charged on your bill throughout the year. I think, let's see, Vaden Health Center has an open house. So Karen and I are not experts on the health insurance plans, but if you need more information about it, please visit the Vaden Health Center on campus and get information directly from them. These are just a sample of a few things that you can avoid to minimize costs on the university bill. Students are required to enroll to a certain level, to at least 12 units, before the first day of term. If they don't do that, the registrar's office will charge a late study list fee. That's what we call it. It's a very avoidable fee. So if you can, encourage your students to enroll on time. Also, of course, if you pay the bill on time, there are no late fees. If your student doesn't lose their ID card, they won't be charged a lost ID card fee. So all these things are avoidable items. Housing damage fees, that's self-explanatory. How many of you are students? Can you raise your hand if you're a student? Yeah, a smattering of students. So this is very common that parents are the ones that feel the pressure of paying the bill. However, when you come to Stanford, the bill is the responsibility of the student. So we will not communicate with the parent about the bill unless the student instructs us to do so. So the way we manage that is through our tool called Stanford IPE. So once the student has an account and can go into Access, as Karen described, they will see a link to Stanford IPE, and that's where they can look at their bill and make payment. And if they want to allow you to pay them, or to pay the university on their behalf, your student can set you up as an authorized payer. So please talk with them about that at the time that they're able to do it. Through the Stanford IPE tool, then you can view the bills and you can make payment. The payment methods that we offer are electronic check, which is the most common thing used by domestic families. International families usually pay through Flywire or Western Union through an international funds transfer process. Those processes minimize the fees that are associated with sending money internationally. You can see that we do take paper checks and we do accept wires, but we don't want you to send us checks or wires. The most secure way to send us payment and the quickest way to send us payment and the easiest way to make sure that the money you send is posted to your student's account quickly is by using the electronic checks or the international funds transfer methods. Notice also that we don't accept credit cards for payment of the university bill. Oopsie. The installment payment plan is a tool that we offer really as a budgeting resource. We found that some families want to pay for those big bills over a 9-month period, as opposed to at the beginning of each term in a big giant chunk. So your student can enroll in the installment payment plan starting in July. And then basically the payments would be July through March. Notice that we're not giving you extra time to pay. The bill for fall is still due on September 15th. You'd just be making the payments in 3 amounts, July and August and September. So it's really a budgeting tool. It's helpful for some people, and I just wanted to make you aware of that. Oh, I should mention, we do send reminder emails. If your student signs up for the installment payment plan, we'll send you a reminder around July 10th, for instance, to say, hey, you said you wanted to make a payment on July 15th. It's coming up. But there are no fees associated with this plan and no penalties if you don't make those payments. One unique program at Stanford is our Mind Over Money Financial Wellness program. Karen and I, through our experiences with students, see every day that this is a ripe time for students to learn about how to manage their own personal finances. And many times, students might get into some difficulties because they just haven't had experience with managing their personal finances. Usually when I poll a group of adults and ask them how they learned how to manage their personal finances, it's trial and error. So we're trying to make a difference, and the financial aid office and my office and a lot of offices all around campus have collaborated to create our Mind Over Money financial wellness program, which includes events, an online tool, one-on-one financial coaching with alums and staff, as well as an academic course, a one-unit academic course. So we encourage you to make your students aware that this program exists. Check out mindovermoney.stanford.edu before you come to Stanford, as well as throughout their lives at Stanford. We're hoping to help put them in good stead for their entire lives and democratize access to financial information and financial opportunities for students. Oh, and I should say, right after this session today, the Mind Over Money folks will be making a presentation about their resources. So if you're comfortable in your seats, you can just stay where you are. All right, as a summary, once you come to Stanford, the student is responsible for their bill. And one of the first lessons for taking care of your personal finances, those students who are in the room, is to look at your university bill every single month. You can set up your parents or other folks as authorized payer if you're so lucky to have other folks that want to pay your bill. Cardinal Care insurance waiver, September 15th. I didn't mention, but this is very important, that please have your students enroll in direct deposit. As Karen said, sometimes we are going to send your student money that is aid meant to pay for other things like travel or books, etc. If you can have that put directly into their bank account, that's the most secure way to do it. So have them enroll in direct deposit. And finally, notify the good people at the financial aid office if anything changes in your circumstances, because they're here to help you. So with that, I think Karen and I will open it up to questions.
And while you are getting into place, let me just say what happens next, right? For those of you who are saying yes to Stanford, thank you. What's going to happen right away in May, by about the second week of May at the latest, we essentially turn you over to the Vice Provost for Undergraduate Education, and those folks start communicating with you on a weekly basis about things that are going on at Stanford. It's a process that they call Approaching Stanford. And through Approaching Stanford is where you're going to be filling out all of the housing information, and you're going to be getting more information about billing and reminders about waiving the health insurance costs, etc. So more information to come for sure. But why don't you go first? I think you were there.
Yes, I have a question about the student contribution and scholarships. If we receive outside scholarships that exceed student contribution, what happens to the excess amount? Does that apply to the following year, or where does that money go?
So there's a long answer to this question. If we receive more in 1 year than the amount of the student responsibility, and the student is receiving need-based funds from us, it would reduce their need-based funds from Stanford, right? So that makes up the difference because our goal is to meet their need, not to give them more. However, there's a couple of things you can do to think about that. I see many first-year students who are getting lots of outside scholarships that are for 1 year only, right? So we encourage them to go back and talk to their donors about, can I hold on to this money until next year? The caveat there is the donor has to agree to hold on to them. They can't be sent to Stanford. We're not going to hold on to them. If we receive them, we will apply them in that year. Another thing that students can do is talk with us about their cost of attendance. If they need to buy a new laptop, for example, and they've got this excess scholarship funds, if students come to us and say, I need to buy a laptop, we will let them take out a student loan to do that. We will add that to their cost of attendance. If they've got this outside scholarship money that they're, in order to maximize use of that scholarship money, they can use it to buy a laptop. Okay? Yes.
Hi. Mine is a U.S. tax question. Because there's so large sums of money being transferred, do I have to pay attention to the process, so I'm not incurring gift tax?
Gift taxes, no. That's not really an issue. The government doesn't consider any of this gift taxable income. Scholarship funds that are more than the amount of tuition and qualified expenses, so mandatory fees, are considered taxable income by the federal government. So for our students who we're helping not only with the tuition but with the room and board as well, that room and board portion of what they're receiving is taxable income. So it is something to keep track of. There is also, do you want to talk about the 1098T process a little bit?
Sure. To add on to the taxable income thing, it's taxable income to the student.
Yes, to the student.
So students typically are not making a lot of money, and just remember that taxable income does not necessarily mean you're going to be taxed, because they're...
It doesn't have to be shown that I am directly paying for the university bill. If my son is taking out money that I give him to pay for his university bill, that won't.
That will be
neither
reflected on the 1098T, the fact that a bill has been paid.
That's true. I want to preface this with the fact that neither Karen nor I are tax professionals. So you should probably ask these questions of a tax professional.
It depends so much on your personal situation.
It does. The 1098T form is a form that we send to students, to U.S. resident students anyhow, that will, the purpose of the form is to show how much has been paid on the account and how much was scholarship. The form is to be used to apply for educational tax credits, like the American Opportunity Credit and the Lifetime Learning Credit. It's not meant in order to calculate the taxable income that Karen was talking about. For that, you want to analyze your student account. I hope that helps.
Let's go over here.
Yes, I know. You mentioned having a student in college also, like say 2 students in college, you take that into us. But what about the situation where you have a student in an independent school, a younger sibling, at the same time while the older sibling is going through college?
Sure,
That's
sure.
taken into consideration.
So you may have noticed when you're filling out the profile, there is a question about, what are the educational expenses for the younger siblings? And we do take that into account. He's asking about if you're paying for tuition at a private school for a younger sibling. We absolutely take those kinds of expenses into account. It's not exactly the same as another sibling enrolled in college. You know, they're still part of your household in most situations, but it does reduce the amount of income we're considering in our calculation. I should say, too, I've got a colleague here from the financial aid office, Ron, wave back there. So as we wrap up these questions, we will be around to answer individual questions as well. But there's another session in here at 2:30.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
If you have put aside money in a 529, how is that used for your calculations? And separately, do you want the payment made directly by the 529 or to the parent first when it actually comes to using them?
In a financial aid calculation, the 529 plan is treated as a parent asset. Even if it's in the student name, it's a parent asset. So in that way, it is part of the expected parent contribution, but that asset side of the equation is not at all weighed as heavily as the income side of the equation. So it's protected quite a bit.
And then if you have a 529 that you'll be using to pay Stanford, there's two ways it can happen. Because there's a couple of kinds of 529. So if you have the kind of 529 plan in which you purchased tuition certificates, which basically is buying tuition at the prior year's rate, or what do you call that?
Prepaid.
Yeah, prepaying tuition at a lower rate. Those funds are sent directly to Stanford and applied to the account on behalf of the student. Most 529 plans, however, are not that kind, and instead are really just like an investment account. And the holder of the 529 plan would tell the plan administrator, hey, I have such and such an amount I need distributed, please give it to me, and then you then make payment through Stanford ePay like any other payment.
Follow up on that question, would the distributor have to send the money to us, and then we would write a check from our account to Stanford?
Yes, that's a common way for it to happen. The administrator sends the money to the parent or the student, whoever its name the account is in, and then the parent or the student would pay Stanford.
Okay. With respect to the 529, I'm not a tax accountant, but I just want to comment that it's better from a tax perspective to have the money sent directly to the university.
Depends on the plan.
Yeah, I'm talking about those that are financial investments. Because if not, then it comes to the parent, and then you have to figure it out on your taxes, and it gets a little bit more complicated.
That may be, however, Stanford.
That's my experience.
Okay, appreciate that. I just wanted to add that part of the reason that Stanford, let me say it again, differently. Stanford is bound by regulations not to share student information with anybody other than the student unless the student tells us that it's okay. So we don't want to share what the bill is for your student with a plan administrator. Therefore, our processes are that we ask the student or the parent to share that information with the plan administrator and then make the payment to us. So that's the way it works at Stanford.
So you mentioned how you would factor in the cost for a younger sibling who's at home as you make your calculations. So I have two older kids that are also in college, and we're footing some of that bill too. And how does that factor into the calculation of the expected family contribution? Because
Is this a
you might
question
not see
about
it, but,
graduate student siblings?
one's a grad student, one's not. But I'm
Yeah.
still,
So I talked about how when you've got more than one undergraduate still in college, we sort of calculate that parent contribution and divide it up among those students who are in college. Those graduate student siblings present an interesting challenge. Graduate students are technically independent. And so, and also in many programs, graduate students, for example, if a student is here at Stanford doing a PhD, they're fully funded for 5 years, right? So there's not a lot coming out of the parents' pockets for those students. So our important question about graduate student siblings is, how much are you paying for them? You know, we understand med schools, for example, ask for parent information and often expect a parent contribution. So the question is, how much are you paying for them? And you would provide that with the financial aid application. No one else is lining up to ask a question.
we
Oh,
have
one
one
more.
Yeah, if the Cardinal Health Plan is annual, what about the fall quarter of the freshman year? Do we need to get a waiver for that, or is it just not going to be included on the bill?
The annual period begins August 31st, and it is included on the first bill.
So there's no way to opt out of it for the first quarter?
Yes, by
opt
waiving by
out.
September 15th.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
Yeah, so you'll see it on the bill, and then it'll be waived, if you waive.
Yes.
If your student does a master's, right, not necessarily a PhD where you're saying that's fully funded, but if some of the programs have a 5th year for a master's, can it be expected that you would get the same, if, assuming nothing changes, that you would get the same, or are master's programs funded in a different way?
Are you talking about our co-term program here at Stanford that allows undergraduates to get a graduate degree sort of in a 5th year?
Right.
Graduate students, again, there's good news, bad news. Good news is they're independent. We don't ask for parents' information when we're looking at eligibility for graduate students. The bad news is our undergraduate need-based scholarship program is not available for graduate students. So they get funding like a graduate student. For some master's programs, there is no funding available, and they take out student loans, which they can do to cover the full cost. For other master's programs, they can do things like help teach courses, course assistants, teaching assistants that pays for their tuition and gives them a little bit of stipend. So there's many different ways of financing graduate education, and those students who are in that 5th year in our co-term program, we consider to be graduate students. Yes.
When the student decides to accept, is there a deposit due with the acceptance, and how much is that, and what does it?
There's a $200 deposit, enrollment deposit, that you pay through the admission website when you're accepting the offer of admission. And it's a prepayment toward the fall quarter bill is essentially what that is, right? So, no other questions? Thank you all. You've been great. Stick around to talk about, oh, we've got one more coming up. Hold on.
How this national merit scholarships is handled? Like, does it count anywhere?
So national merit scholarships are considered like of all other outside awards. Stanford does not make any matching contributions towards national merit scholarships. Thank you all very
Thanks for
much.
coming.
If you're comfortable, stick around and talk about mind over money. Thank you.